The last three first-round picks by the Commanders, Danny. Jamin Davis, 19th overall, 2021. Jahan Dotson, 16th overall, 2022. Emmanuel Forbes, 16th overall, 2023. All three, in varying degrees, have had disappointing stretches. Dotson, I thought, was really impressive as a rookie, took a step back last year. Jamin Davis is never going to reach top 20 pick status, probably at his position. We could say 3 years in, but he's gotten to a point now where he's a serviceable linebacker, and Forbes is coming off of a brutal rookie year that saw him get benched. The thought is there's a lot more in the tank. But those are the last three first-round picks from this last regime. They're all still on the roster, and they're now working with different coaches on offense and on defense. And because of that, there is some renewed hope and energy around these players that maybe the problem was not the grocery picking, but the cooking. Maybe the problem isn't that Jamin Davis, Jahan Dotson, and Emmanuel Forbes aren't really talented players. It's that they weren't implemented and used properly. And so we've got some thought, I think, as a fan base, that one or two or all three of these guys could actually still break out this year.
So as I kind of look at this, the organization, be it Peters, Newmark, whoever's in charge of the decision making, they've told you with their actions what they believe in. They believe in Jahan Dotson. Now, I don't as much. We'll get to that in a second, but you could tell by their actions in the draft how they handled the receiver position. A compensatory third-round pick, really a glorified fourth-rounder, was their first receiver weapon selection in the draft. And Luke McCaffrey, I like him. I hope he does well. But are we really counting on a fourth-rounder glorified to step in and be your number 2 receiver? Maybe he's a number 3, maybe he's a slot guy. There's a confidence vote there in Dotson. Then you look at the cornerback spot. They drafted Sanders in the second round, despite having a first-rounder and a second-rounder from last year inherited on the roster. You can look at the linebacker spot. They basically are putting Davis in a place that he, I would say, belongs, giving a lot more responsibility to Wagner and Louvu, which I would too, by the way. They upgraded that spot.
Arguably their biggest priority based on resources spent in free agency was to go out and fix linebacker, which had been neglected since the Davis pick almost universally by the previous regime.
Indeed. And they didn't want to pony up for Cole Holcomb. They had no interest.
Rivera played linebacker on the 85 Bears. Del Rio was a linebacker, and inexplicably to me, they kind of devalued the position. They thought, I think, the league was trending away from that, but the really good defenses haven't. But yeah, to your point, they sunk more resources into linebacker to not have to rely upon Davis than they certainly did at wide receiver. And to an extent, than they did at corner. So they probably view it as Dotson most likely to play really well.
Yep.
Forbes still has a chance to help because they didn't draft an outside corner, boundary corner. They drafted a nickel corner in Sanders still, to use the example you brought up.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're not as high on Davis. But that stands to reason. Like, Davis has played the most. Forbes very minimally was on the grass last year and struggled. And Dotson in a limited time has showed the most. You can kind of look at last year, if you want to, as a sophomore slump, because he did have huge moments as a rookie. I say this all the time, but if you go watch his sizzle reel on YouTube from his rookie year, he looks like a dude. I mean, he had some really impressive, great moments as a rookie wide receiver in this league.
Indeed. So again, they're when they roll in, talking about, again, Peters and company, and they go, let's look at the roster. You can tell what they thought pretty easily, right? They overhauled so many different pieces, so many different short-term deals, so many different veterans, so many different short-term contracts, just to wash away some of the stink of the previous regime, and to say this is an implementation of a new culture, a new way of doing things, not long-term answers. There are only a couple of guys that you might say would be here beyond one season, maybe a handful off the top of my head. So it kind of tells you what their eval was. So I agree with you in terms of the hierarchy. Maybe you could parse it up and say, maybe they think more of Davis because they're going to have him do one thing. I don't know if it's a vote of confidence in Forbes or not. That's up to interpretation. I think a reasonable mind can disagree. But their votes of confidence or lack thereof in certain spots kind of tells you what they think.
Question to pose for you guys on the MGM National Harbor listener lines right now, in the chat on the 106.7 The Fan YouTube, wherever you're checking us out today on the Odyssey app all over the country. 800-636-1067 is the number for you. Of the 3 first-round picks who have disappointed recently. Which is the most likely to thrive with this new coaching staff? If we were to tell you that either Jamin Davis, Jahan Dotson, or Emmanuel Forbes is going to have a big year, they're going to shine this season, who would you bet on and why? 800-636-1067. So I would start the conversation by saying Dotson, the 16th overall pick in 2022, because I think he's the most talented and I think he's shown the most. That is different than saying he will benefit the most from the new staff or coaching. But it is very possible horizontal offense spread out, the sideways raid or whatever we're going to call what they're going to do under Cliff Kingsbury this year, that he will benefit from Kingsbury's arrival. He will benefit from a new scheme. I do think he's going to just be better off because Bieniemy and Sam Howell are not here, who I don't think were good for his business, which is not to say that neither can do their job. I don't think Bieniemy was particularly good, but for whatever reason, the rapport between he and Sam Howell didn't really work, right? For whatever reason, Bieniemy's offense did not favor Jahan Dotson. And some of this is on him. He dropped several passes last year, certainly was not as consistent and reliable as he was a year earlier. But I do think he's the most talented guy. And of the three, Davis, Dotson, Forbes, he will have the best season. I'm just not sure that the coaching is the reason for that as much as I don't think Jamin Davis should have been drafted in the first round. I think he's probably a third round type player. I don't think Emmanuel Forbes should have been drafted in the first round. To me, he looks like a mid-round type player. Jahan Dotson, you could say maybe should have been drafted later, but he has at times looked like a first rounder. And I have not really seen that from those other guys. And that's why I would put my money on him having the best year of the three.
I think it's a reasonable case. I mean, to me, the answer is actually Jamin Davis. And it's because they're not going to ask him to do what he can't do. I think that's been the biggest problem here is he's been successful in short bursts running straight. He's good at that. Have him run straight. Now that you have an adult that's going to put everybody where they're supposed to be in Bobby Wagner, now that you got a versatile weapon in Frankie Louvu, Jamin, run straight and fast towards the quarterback. You might see some pressures. Jamin, run straight and fast towards the flat. You might see some tackles. I mean, he's been a 100-tackle guy over the course of a season. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a ton. It just you're on the field and you're a linebacker. You might end up with 100 tackles.
Yeah, that and $2 will get you a pack of Starburst.
Yeah,
right?
so
I mean, 100 tackles as a linebacker just tells me you played some football.
Means you're on the field. So he's turned in, very mediocre report cards over the course of his career. And you're right that his biggest crime was that he was a first rounder. If he was a fourth rounder, I go, oh, nice, fine. That's neat. If that guy can run a little bit and play. Absurd he was taken in the first round. We said so at the time, whatever. But to me, I think he'll have his skill set maximized. That's why I like it.
So I think he will benefit the most from coaching along the lines that you're talking about. Because I think this staff will be better at finding out what guys do well and asking them to do it than the last staff was. To me, and maybe this isn't fair, but on the outside looking in, with the perspective that I've been able to glean, I think the last staff was more of a, here's what we run.
Yeah, we do this.
Here's how we do it. Let's do it at a high level. Go. Do the thing we told you to do.
Well, that's been a Washington staple. It's when you go get Josh Norman, who was an all-pro, doing it one thing one way and go, that's great. We do this. Terrible fit, right?
This group is going to follow up on what every coach says. Like, we're going to adapt to our players. We'll see what they do. The proof's been in the pudding for years with Quinn and Witt and their adaptability and how versatile and multiple they can be defensively. And we've already seen it. They're talking about using Jamin Davis as a pass rusher off the edge.
Mm-hmm.
Ron Rivera never, in every press conference he ever did, and every question ever asked about Jamin Davis, same with Jack Del Rio, they never once talked about him being used in that role as a pass rusher. This group hasn't even coached him in a game yet and is already doing it. They have figured out, watching the film pretty quickly, what a lot of us have been saying for a while, which is the ceiling for him as an off-ball linebacker standing on the second level of the defense is pretty pedestrian. But the one plus attribute he seems to have is the ability to pin his ears back, get downhill, and get after the quarterback. So because of the arrival of some guys that are going to think differently and use them differently, I'm with you. He will be the biggest beneficiary of the new staff. But if you're asking me who's going to have the best season, I would still go with Dotson because I just think Dotson is a better player at his position than Davis is. Not a knock on Jamin Davis as much as I really still like Jahan Dotson. I know we part a little bit on that.
Yeah.
I'm not telling you he's a star. I have scaled back last year's expectations where I thought he would lead the team in catches, but I still think Jahan Dotson could be a tremendous slot receiver. I think he could be a fine second wide receiver in the NFL and a good offense. I think he could be an annual, 65, 70 catch guy in the peak of his career. I believe that.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So now we're talking about what that impact actually is. If he's a 60 catch, 700-yard player, is that going to be more impactful than Davis? I think probably. If Davis is a 5-sack, occasional chaos bringing linebacker that's running around a lot.
Yeah, you average 12 yards a catch, which is about his career average, I would imagine. That's somewhere between 700, 750 yards as a wide receiver opposite McLaurin in an offense where you've got Eckler, where you've got Ertz, whoever else moves forward at the tight end position, Sinnott otherwise. That's a pretty good weapon. Unless Jamin Davis is getting you 7.5 sacks or something like that.
Then it's a different story. Yeah.
But if he's just your third, fourth linebacker who occasionally rushes the quarterback on passing downs and gives you 3.5 sacks, then it's pretty night and day.